The wrench slipped from Marie Sullivan's oil-stained fingers as the F-22 Raptor's engine roared to life above her. She watched from beneath the aircraft as another pilot took off into the Nevada sky. The $180 million machine, climbing effortlessly toward the horizon. For the 100th time that month, she felt the familiar ache in her chest, a longing she'd buried so deep that most days she could pretend it wasn't there. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. At Nellis Air Force Base, Staff Sergeant Marie Sullivan was known for three things: her ability to diagnose engine problems that stumped veteran mechanics, her perfectionist attention to detail, and her complete lack of interest in anything beyond the flight line. At 29, she'd spent 6 years maintaining the most advanced fighter jets in the world, and everyone assumed she was exactly where she belonged. The morning sun cast long shadows across the tarmac as Marie gathered her tools from beneath. Raptor 04. She moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd performed these tasks thousands of times. Her hands automatically checking connections and fluid levels while her mind remained elsewhere. The other mechanics respected her work but found her distant, professional to a fault, never joining them for drinks after shift or sharing stories about weekend plans. "Sullivan, you got a minute?" called Master Sergeant Tom Bradley, the crew chief who'd supervised Marie since her arrival at Nellis. He approached with a clipboard and the slightly harried expression he wore whenever headquarters demanded updates on aircraft readiness. Marie wiped her hands on her coveralls and nodded. "What do you need, Sergeant?" "Raptor 12 is giving the pilots some trouble with the flight control system. Third different pilot this week complained about response lag in the roll axis. I need your eyes on it before we ground the bird." She followed Bradley across the flight line to where the sleek gray fighter sat in its designated spot. Even after 6 years, Marie still felt a small thrill at the sight of these machines. The F-22 represented the pinnacle of aerospace engineering stealth. Capabilities that made it nearly invisible to enemy radar, maneuverability that defied physics, and weapon systems that could engage multiple targets simultaneously. "What kind of lag are they reporting?" Marie asked, already pulling on her work gloves. Lieutenant Commander Hayes said it felt like a half-second delay when banking left at high G-forces. "Could be hydraulics, could be software, could be pilot error for all I know. But Hayes is one of our best stick and rudder guys, so if he says something's off, something's off." Marie climbed up the crew ladder to examine the cockpit systems. As she settled into the pilot's seat to run diagnostics, her hands found the controls with an unconscious familiarity that would have surprised anyone watching. Her fingers traced the stick and throttle positions, her feet automatically finding the rudder pedals, her eyes scanning the instrument layout with the quick efficiency of someone reading a familiar book. The diagnostic computer hummed as she ran through the pre-flight checks, each system responding to her commands. To Bradley and the other mechanics gathering around the aircraft, she appeared to be simply following standard troubleshooting procedures. They couldn't see the way her body settled naturally into the ejection seat, or how her breathing unconsciously matched the rhythm of someone preparing for flight. "There," she said after 20 minutes of testing. "The problem's in the fly-by-wire system. Servo actuator in the left aileron circuit is developing microsecond delays under load. It's not enough to show up in normal diagnostics, but at 8 or 9 Gs, that delay becomes noticeable to an experienced pilot." Bradley peered at the diagnostic readout with the expression of someone trying to decipher hieroglyphics. "How the hell did you figure that out? This thing passed all its automated checks yesterday." Marie climbed down from the cockpit, already mentally cataloging the parts and procedures needed for the repair. The computer only tests static responses. You have to simulate combat load conditions to catch intermittent failures in the control surfaces. I ran the servo through a full range of motion test while applying simulated G-force loads to the flight control inputs. Simulated how? By manually applying pressure to the control stick while running the diagnostic sequence. If you know how much force a pilot would typically apply during a high G-turn, you can recreate those conditions on the ground. Bradley stared at her for a moment, then shook his head with the bemused expression of someone who'd stopped trying to understand. How Marie's mind worked years ago. Whatever. Just get it fixed before Lieutenant Commander Hayes decides my maintenance crew doesn't know what we're doing. Marie spent the next 4 hours replacing the faulty servo actuator, a delicate procedure that required removing half the aircraft's internal access panels. She worked alone, as she preferred, her movements precise and economical. Other mechanics passed by occasionally, offering help that she politely declined, reinforcing her reputation as a competent but solitary worker. As she reconnected the final hydraulic line, Airman First Class Danny Morrison approached with the hesitant air of someone interrupting a master craftsman. "Sergeant Sullivan, I hate to bother you, but I'm having trouble with the radar array calibration on Raptor 18. The manual says the phased array should align automatically, but I keep getting error codes." Marie glanced up from her work. Morrison was barely 21, fresh from technical training school, still intimidated by the complexity of the systems he was expected to maintain. She remembered being his age, though her path to aviation maintenance had been considerably different. "What kind of error codes?" "Signal coherence failures on the primary antenna elements. I've replaced the transmitter modules twice, but the system won't achieve lock-on parameters." Marie set down her tools and followed Morrison to Raptor 18. The radar array access panel was open, revealing the intricate maze of circuits and antenna elements that gave the F-22 its ability to track multiple targets simultaneously while remaining undetected. She studied the error messages on Morrison's diagnostic tablet, then climbed up to examine the physical array. Her hands moved over the antenna elements with practiced familiarity, checking connections and alignment with an efficiency that surprised Morrison. "Here's your problem," she said after a few minutes. "The array isn't physically misaligned, it's a software issue. The coherence algorithms are trying to compensate for what they think is antenna drift, but the drift parameters in the software are set for the older APG-77 radar. This bird has the upgraded APG-77V1 system. You need to load the updated calibration protocols." Morrison looked at her with the expression of someone who just watched a magic trick. "How did you know that?" "I mean, the error messages didn't mention anything about software versions." "Experience," Marie replied simply. "You learn to read between the lines. The V1 system has tighter tolerances and more sensitive drift detection. What looks like hardware failure is usually the software being overly cautious." She guided Morrison through the process of updating the radar calibration software, explaining each step with the patient tone of someone who genuinely enjoyed teaching technical skills. As they worked, other mechanics began gathering around, drawn by Morrison's questions and Marie's detailed explanations. "Sergeant Sullivan," said Staff Sergeant Lisa Park, one of the avionics specialists, "how do you know so much about radar systems? I thought you were engines and flight controls." Marie paused, realizing she'd revealed more expertise than usual. For 6 years, she'd been careful to stay within her assigned specialty, avoiding the kind of comprehensive knowledge that might raise questions about her background. "Cross-training," she said carefully. "In my spare time, I study the technical manuals for all the aircraft systems. Better to understand how everything works together than to just focus on one component." It was a reasonable explanation, and the gathered mechanics accepted it with nods of approval. Several mentioned their own efforts to broaden their technical knowledge, though none had achieved Marie's depth of understanding across multiple systems. As the group dispersed back to their various tasks, Park lingered behind, Marie, can I ask you something? Have you ever thought about applying for warrant officer training? With your technical knowledge and teaching ability, you'd make an excellent maintenance supervisor. The question caught Marie off guard. In 6 years at Nellis, no one had suggested she might be suited for leadership roles or advanced training. She'd been content to remain an anonymous specialist, competent but unremarkable. "I'm happy where I am," she replied. The same answer she'd given to every suggestion of advancement or change. Park studied her with the shrewd expression of someone who'd spent 15 years in the Air Force and learned to read people as well as technical manuals. "You know, Marie, in all the time I've worked with you, I've never heard you talk about your background. Where did you train before Nellis? What made you choose aircraft maintenance?" Marie felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the same sensation she experienced whenever conversations ventured too close to her past. She'd rehearsed her cover story countless times, but the lies never came easily. Basic training at Lackland, then tech school at Shepherd AFB. I've always been good with mechanical systems, so maintenance seemed like a natural fit. It was technically true, as far as it went. She had attended those schools, though not in the capacity her personnel file indicated. Park nodded, seemingly satisfied, but Marie caught a flicker of something in her expression: curiosity, perhaps, or the recognition that the explanation was somehow incomplete. The afternoon brought a steady stream of routine maintenance tasks. Marie replaced worn brake pads on Raptor 09, diagnosed a faulty fuel flow sensor on Raptor 15, and spent 2 hours tracking down an intermittent electrical fault that had been plaguing Raptor 23 for weeks. Each job reinforced her reputation as the mechanic who could solve problems that stumped everyone else. As the day shift wound down, Marie found herself alone with Raptor 04, the aircraft she'd started working on that morning. The flight line had grown quiet, with most of the maintenance crews heading to the mess hall or their off-base housing. She climbed back into the cockpit to complete her post-maintenance inspection, running through the systems checks with methodical precision. Sitting in the pilot's seat, surrounded by the familiar array of instruments and controls, Marie allowed herself a moment of weakness. Her hands settled naturally on the stick and throttles, her feet finding the rudder pedals without conscious thought. For just a few seconds, she let herself remember what it felt like to push the throttles forward and feel 44,000 pounds of thrust lift her into the sky. The memory was interrupted by voices approaching across the tarmac. Marie quickly finished her inspection and climbed down from the cockpit, gathering her tools with practiced efficiency. Captain Robert Hayes, the pilot who'd reported the control system problems, was walking toward the aircraft with his crew chief, Sergeant Sullivan. Hess called out as he approached. "I heard you track down the problem with my bird." "Control lag in the roll axis?" "Yes, sir." "Faulty servo actuator in the left aileron circuit. We've replaced the component and run full system checks. The aircraft is ready for flight operations." Hayes nodded, then paused, studying Marie with the same curious expression she'd seen from Park earlier. "Sergeant, I've been flying Raptors for 8 years, and I've worked with dozens of maintenance crews. Most techs can fix problems after they're identified, but very few can diagnose intermittent failures that don't show up in standard tests. That takes a different level of understanding." Marie felt her pulse quicken, but kept her expression neutral. "Just experience, sir. After a while, you learn to think like the aircraft systems." "That's exactly what I mean," Hayes continued. "You think like a pilot thinks. Most mechanics approach problems from the ground up. They understand how the components work. But you seem to understand how the systems behave in flight. That's unusual." The observation hit closer to home than Marie was comfortable with. She'd spent 6 years trying to think like a mechanic, suppressing the pilot's instincts that came as naturally as breathing. "I study the flight manuals in my spare time," she said, falling back on the same explanation she'd given Park. It helps to understand how the systems are supposed to perform under operational conditions. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Hayes accepted the explanation with a nod, but Marie caught him glancing at her again as he began his pre-flight inspection. She gathered her tools quickly and headed toward the maintenance hangar, eager to escape the scrutiny. The hangar was nearly empty, most of the day shift having departed for their evening routines. Marie secured her tools in her assigned locker and changed out of her coveralls, trading them for the civilian clothes she wore for the drive to her off-base apartment. As she prepared to leave, she caught sight of her reflection in the metal locker door. The woman looking back at her bore little resemblance to the person she'd been 6 years ago. The short brown hair was regulation length but unremarkable, her face bearing the weathered look of someone who spent her days working outdoors in the Nevada sun. Only her eyes remained unchanged, the same sharp blue that had once been described in fitness reports as alert and aggressive, though now they held a carefully cultivated expression of patient competence. As Marie walked across the parking lot to her modest sedan, she allowed herself to think about the questions she'd faced that day. Park's inquiry about warrant officer training, Hayes' observation about her pilot-like thinking, Morrison's amazement at her comprehensive system knowledge. After 6 years of careful anonymity, she was beginning to attract the kind of attention she'd worked so hard to avoid. The drive to her apartment took her past the flight line, where she could see several F-22s silhouetted against the evening sky. Night training operations would begin soon, with pilots practicing the low-visibility missions that were the Raptor's specialty. Marie had learned to time her commute to avoid watching the takeoffs, but tonight she found herself slowing as a pair of fighters began their taxi to the runway. She pulled into a parking space and watched as the aircraft lined up for departure. Even at a distance, she could identify the individual planes by subtle variations in their configuration and markings. Raptor 07 with its slightly faded nose cone paint, Raptor 11 with the small dent in its left wingtip from a hangar mishap 3 months ago. Raptor 16 with its replacement engine, panels that didn't quite match the original stealth coating. The lead aircraft began its takeoff roll, afterburners painting twin cones of blue flame against the darkening sky. Marie watched the familiar sequence rotation, gear retraction, the steep climb angle that showcased the F-22's incredible thrust-to-weight ratio. Her hands unconsciously mimicked the control inputs she knew the pilot was making, her body swaying slightly as she anticipated the G-forces of the climbing turn. As the second fighter followed its leader into the sky, Marie forced herself to look away. This was the dangerous part of her carefully constructed routine, the moments when her guard was down and the memories threatened to surface. She'd learned to recognize the warning signs and developed techniques for pushing them back down where they belonged. She started her car and completed the drive to her apartment, a modest one-bedroom unit in a complex populated mostly by other junior enlisted personnel. The living room was spartanly furnished: a couch, a television, a small dining table, and a bookshelf filled with technical manuals and aviation magazines. No photographs, no personal mementos, nothing that might connect her to the life she'd left behind. Marie heated a frozen dinner in the microwave and settled in front of the television, flipping through channels until she found a documentary about marine biology. Safe, neutral content that wouldn't trigger unwanted memories or associations. As she ate, she reviewed her mental checklist for the following day: 3 scheduled inspections, 2 pending repair orders, and a training session for new personnel. On hydraulic system maintenance. It was a routine that had sustained her for 6 years, providing structure and purpose while keeping her past safely buried. But as she prepared for bed, Marie couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing. The questions from Park and Hayes, her own unconscious reveals of expertise beyond her supposed training, Small cracks in the carefully constructed facade she'd maintained for so long. Standing at her bathroom mirror, brushing her teeth with the same methodical precision she applied to aircraft maintenance, Marie studied her reflection once more. The woman in the mirror had learned to be satisfied with anonymity, to find fulfillment in solving technical problems and helping younger mechanics develop their skills. But beneath the surface, Marie knew the pilot was still there, dormant, but not dead, waiting for circumstances that might force her back into the light dot. As she turned off the lights and settled into bed, Marie told herself that tomorrow would be just another day on the flight line. More routine maintenance, more problems to solve, more opportunities to blend into the background of Nellis Air Force Base operations. But somewhere in the darkness, she could hear the distant sound of F-22 engines as the night training mission continued, and she knew that part of her would always be up there with them. No matter how hard she tried to keep her feet on the ground, the classified personnel file buried deep in the Pentagon's secure servers told a different story than the way one Marie Sullivan lived every day at Nellis Air Force Base. According to those encrypted records, Captain Marie Elizabeth Sullivan had been one of the most promising F-22 pilots in Air Force history before her official death during Operation Midnight Falcon in 2018. The mission had been straightforward on paper, a deep reconnaissance flight over hostile territory to gather intelligence on enemy air defense systems. What wasn't in the official briefing was that Marie would be flying alone at night through some of the most heavily defended airspace in the world. The F-22's stealth capabilities made such missions possible, but they required a level of skill and composure that few pilots possessed. Marie had been 23 then, the youngest pilot ever assigned to the 325th Fighter Wing's Elite Reconnaissance Squadron. Her instructors at pilot training had noted her exceptional spatial awareness and intuitive understanding of aircraft systems. During her F-22 conversion training, she'd consistently scored in the top 1% of all measured performance criteria. But it was her ability to remain calm under extreme pressure that had caught the attention of the classified mission planners. The Pentagon had been tracking the development of a new surface-to-air missile system that could potentially neutralize America's stealth advantage. Traditional intelligence-gathering methods had failed to penetrate the security around the weapons test facility. Satellite imagery provided only limited information, and human intelligence assets couldn't get close enough to the installation to gather technical details. The solution was Operation Midnight Falcon. A single F-22 would penetrate enemy airspace during a scheduled test of the new missile system, using the Raptor's advanced sensors to record the weapon's electromagnetic signature and performance characteristics. The data would be crucial for developing countermeasures, but the mission carried enormous risks. If the pilot was captured, the political ramifications could destabilize the entire region. Marie had volunteered for the mission after her squadron commander outlined the stakes. 3 other pilots had been considered, but her combination of technical expertise and psychological profile made her the obvious choice. She understood the F-22 systems well enough to maximize the aircraft's stealth capabilities, and her performance under stress suggested she could complete the mission. Even if everything went wrong, the flight had launched from a classified base in Allied territory. Marie's F-22 loaded with specialized reconnaissance equipment instead of weapons. The mission plan called for her to approach the target area at maximum stealth configuration, record the missile test from a safe distance, and return without engaging enemy forces. Intelligence estimates suggested she could complete the entire flight without being detected. For the first 2 hours, everything had proceeded according to plan. Marie had navigated through 3 separate air defense zones without triggering any alarms. Her aircraft stealth coding and electronic countermeasures render invisible to enemy radar systems. The F-22's passive sensors had allowed her to map the locations of surface-to-air missile sites and fighter patrols, building a comprehensive picture of enemy defensive Capabilities. The target area had appeared on her displays exactly as briefed. A GAVI-LY fortified installation surrounded by multiple layers of air defenses. Marie had positioned her aircraft at the predetermined observation point, 30 miles from the test site, and activated the specialized recording equipment. The new enemy missile system was scheduled to conduct a test firing in 15 minutes. That's when the mission had gone catastrophically wrong. Marie never learned whether enemy intelligence services had discovered Operation Midnight Falcon or if she'd simply had the worst possible luck. As she waited for the missile test to begin, her radar warning receiver had suddenly erupted with threat indications. 6 enemy fighters were climbing toward her position from 3 different directions, their search radars active and clearly vectored to her location. The F-22 stealth capabilities were designed to defeat ground-based radar systems, but they were less effective against airborne interceptors operating at close range. Marie had found herself in the nightmare scenario that every stealth pilot feared. Detected by enemy fighters with nowhere to hide. Her training had taken over immediately. Marie had shut down all unnecessary systems to minimize her electromagnetic signature and begun evasive maneuvers designed to break the enemy fighters. Radar lock. The F-22's superior speed and maneuverability gave her advantages, but she was outnumbered 6-1 in hostile territory with no support. The first missile launch had come from her 6 o'clock position, an enemy fighter firing from maximum range, in hopes of forcing her into the engagement envelope of the other interceptors. Marie had defeated the missile with a combination of defensive maneuvering and electronic countermeasures, but the effort had revealed her position to the other enemy aircraft. What followed was a running air battle that showcased both the F-22's capabilities and Marie's exceptional skill as a pilot. She had used the Raptor's stealth and speed to engage the enemy fighters one at a time, never allowing them to coordinate their attacks effectively. Her first kill had come from a position the enemy pilots thought was impossible, the F-22's advanced radar and weapon systems, allowing her to fire from beyond visual range while remaining undetected. The second and third kills had required close range maneuvering that pushed both Marie and her aircraft to their limits. The F-22's thrust vectoring and fly-by-wire flight controls had enabled maneuvers that would have been impossible in earlier fighter aircraft, but the sustained high G-forces had tested Marie's physical endurance and mental focus. By the time she defeated the 4th enemy fighter, Marie's aircraft had sustained significant damage. Enemy missile fragments had punctured her left engine intake, reducing thrust and creating an electromagnetic signature that made stealth impossible to maintain. Her fuel state was becoming critical, and she was still 200 miles from friendly territory. The 5th enemy fighter had been piloted by someone with comparable skill to Marie's own. The dogfight had lasted nearly 10 minutes, both aircraft performing maneuvers at the edge of their flight envelopes. Marie had finally gained the advantage by using a defensive tactic that her opponent hadn't expected, but the victory had come at a cost. Her aircraft's flight control system had been damaged by enemy cannon fire, making the F-22 barely controllable. The 6th enemy fighter had found her as she attempted to escape toward friendly airspace. With her stealth compromised and her aircraft damaged, Marie had been forced to rely purely on pilot skill and the F-22's raw performance. The final engagement had taken place at treetop level, both aircraft exceeding their design limits as they maneuvered through mountainous terrain. Marie's killing shot had come at the cost of her own aircraft's survival. The enemy fighter's explosion had sent debris through her right engine, causing catastrophic failure and forcing her to attempt an emergency landing in hostile territory. She had managed to find a small clearing in dense forest, but the landing had destroyed the F-22 and left her stranded deep behind enemy lines. The next 72 hours had tested every aspect of Marie's survival training. She had evaded enemy search teams while making her way toward a predetermined extraction point, carrying the recorded intelligence data and fighting off hypothermia and dehydration. Special operations forces had finally reached her position, but the extraction had required a firefight that left 3 enemy soldiers dead and Marie wounded. The intelligence data she had gathered proved invaluable for developing countermeasures to the enemy missile system, but the political costs of the mission had been enormous. Enemy propaganda had claimed that an American stealth fighter had been shot down during an unprovoked attack, and the wreckage of Marie's F-22 had provided them with physical evidence to support their claims. The Pentagon had faced an impossible choice: acknowledge the mission and risk a diplomatic crisis that could lead to broader conflict, or deny everything and sacrifice one of their most promising young pilots. The decision had been made at the highest levels of government, with input from the State Department and National Security Council. Operation Midnight Falcon had never existed. Captain Marie Sullivan had died in a training accident during routine flight operations. The official investigation had concluded that mechanical failure had caused her F-22 to crash in a remote area, with the wreckage too damaged to recover useful components. Her body had never been found, but that wasn't unusual in cases involving high-speed aircraft impacts. Marie had been given a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. She could accept a new identity and disappear from military aviation forever, or face potential prosecution for unauthorized disclosure of classified information if she ever revealed the truth about Operation Midnight Falcon. The Pentagon's lawyers had made it clear that her survival was itself a state secret that could not be acknowledged without compromising ongoing intelligence operations. The transformation from Captain Marie Sullivan to Staff Sergeant Marie Sullivan had been handled by specialists who dealt with witness protection and deep cover operations. Her military records had been altered to show enlistment as an aircraft mechanic rather than officer training as a pilot. New identification documents, educational transcripts, and employment history had been created to support her cover identity. The most difficult part hadn't been learning to act like a maintenance technician. Marie's technical knowledge from pilot training had made that transition surprisingly easy. The hardest challenge had been suppressing 6 years of pilot instincts and muscle memory while working around the aircraft she'd once flown in combat. Every day at Nellis Air Force Base was a careful balancing act. Marie had to demonstrate enough competence to be effective at her job without revealing the depth of knowledge that would raise questions about her background. She'd learned to think like a mechanic while fighting the urge to think like a pilot, to diagnose problems from the ground up rather than from the perspective of someone who understood how the systems behaved in flight. The loneliness had been unexpected. As a pilot, Marie had been part of a close-knit community where trust and mutual dependence created bonds stronger than family. The maintenance crews at Nellis were professional and competent, but they didn't share the same intensity of purpose that had defined her previous life. She'd learned to find satisfaction in solving technical problems and mentoring younger mechanics, but it wasn't the same as the adrenaline-fueled camaraderie of a fighter squadron. The most painful moments came during aircraft emergencies, when her pilot training would have been invaluable, but her cover identity prevented her from offering help. She'd watched pilots struggle with problems she could have solved, seen aircraft grounded for issues she could have diagnosed in minutes, listened to briefings on tactical situations where her combat experience could have saved lives. 6 years of careful discipline had created a routine that kept her past safely buried. Marie had convinced herself that she could live indefinitely as a maintenance technician, finding purpose in ensuring that other pilots had properly functioning aircraft, even if she could never fly again herself. But recent events had begun to crack the facade she'd worked so hard to maintain. The questions from staff, Sergeant Park and Captain Hayes, had been more pointed than usual, suggesting that her unconscious displays of pilot-level knowledge were becoming harder to explain away. Morrison's amazement at her comprehensive understanding of radar systems had drawn attention from other mechanics who were beginning to notice patterns in her expertise that didn't match her supposed training. Most troubling was her own growing carelessness. After 6 years of suppression, her pilot instincts were becoming harder to control. She'd caught herself settling into aircraft cockpits with too much familiarity, running diagnostic procedures that revealed knowledge beyond her cover story, explaining system behaviors from the perspective of someone who'd experienced them in flight rather than learned them from manuals. The secure phone in Marie's apartment had remained silent for 6 years, but she knew it was still connected to the Pentagon's most classified communication networks. The number was known to only 3 people: her former squadron commander, now a brigadier general, the intelligence officer who had planned Operation Midnight Falcon, and the Pentagon's director of special access programs. If that phone ever rang, it would mean that her carefully constructed new life was about to end. As Marie lay in bed reviewing the day's events, she realized that the cracks in her cover story were becoming too obvious to ignore. Hayes's observation about her pilot-like thinking had been particularly astute, suggesting that he was beginning to suspect her background wasn't what her personnel file indicated. If a fighter pilot was starting to notice inconsistencies, it would only be a matter of time before others began asking more difficult questions. The smart thing would be to request a transfer to another base, maybe even another career field entirely. She could become a vehicle mechanic or an electronics technician, work on systems that didn't constantly remind her of the life she'd lost. But the thought of leaving the flight line, of never again working on the aircraft that had once been extensions of her own body, felt like a death sentence. Marie had made her peace with anonymity, but she wasn't sure she could survive complete separation from aviation. The F-22s at Nellis were the closest thing she had to a connection with her former self, and maintaining them provided a sense of purpose that had sustained her through 6 years of exile. To give that up would be to lose the last vestige of Captain Marie Sullivan forever. As she drifted towards sleep, Marie told herself that she could maintain the facade for a few more years, at least until the classified details of Operation Midnight Falcon were declassified enough to allow her to reclaim her true identity. But deep down, she knew that her carefully constructed world was becoming increasingly unstable. The pilot inside her was growing stronger, and it was only a matter of time before circumstances forced her to choose between maintaining her cover and doing what she'd been trained to do. The last thing she remembered before sleep was the distant sound of F-22 engines as the night training mission continued overhead, carrying pilots into the same sky where Captain Marie Sullivan had once ruled supreme. The first sign of trouble came at 0347 hours on a Tuesday morning when the base's emergency klaxon jolted Marie from deep sleep. She rolled out of bed with the automatic response of someone whose body remembered combat deployments, already reaching for clothes before her conscious mind had fully processed the alarm. The sound pattern wasn't the usual fire drill or security exercise. This was the real thing. Marie's radio crackled to life as she dressed. All maintenance personnel report to designated hangars immediately. This is not a drill. Repeat, all maintenance personnel to hangars. The emergency readiness condition is now in effect. She drove through the pre-dawn darkness toward Nellis, passing convoys of security vehicles heading in the opposite direction. The base's perimeter lights blazed with unusual intensity, and she could see aircraft launching from the runways in rapid succession. Whatever was happening, it involved the entire 325th Fighter Wing. The maintenance hangar was chaotic when Marie arrived. Senior NCOs were shouting orders over the noise of aircraft engines and ground support equipment. Master Sergeant Bradley spotted her immediately and waved her toward a group of mechanics gathered around a situation board. "Sullivan, thank God you're here. We've got a developing situation that's going to push every aircraft we have to the limit." Bradley's usually calm demeanor was strained, and Marie could see stress lines around his eyes that hadn't been there the day before. Staff Sergeant Park appeared at Marie's shoulder, her face grim. What's the situation, Sergeant? Intelligence. Detected an imminent threat to classified installations in the southwest. Details are need to know, but the short version is we're looking at a coordinated attack by unknown aircraft approaching from multiple vectors. Every F-22 squadron in the western United States is being scrambled for intercept missions. Marie felt her pulse quicken as her pilot training automatically began processing the tactical situation. Multiple vector attacks suggested sophisticated planning and significant resources. For the Air Force to scramble every available F-22, the threat had to be both immediate and overwhelming. "What's our role?" Park asked. "Keep every bird flying. Normal maintenance schedules are suspended. Any aircraft that can fly will fly, and any aircraft that can't fly needs to be mission ready within 6 hours. We're looking at continuous operations for the foreseeable future." Bradley turned to Marie specifically. "Sullivan, I need you to take charge of the rapid turnaround team. Your diagnostic skills are going to be crucial if we're going to keep these birds in the air during extended combat operations." Marie nodded, already mentally cataloging the challenges they would face. Extended combat operations meant aircraft would be returning with battle damage, depleted consumables, and systems stressed beyond normal operational limits. The maintenance team would need to perform miracles of efficiency to keep the squadron combat effective. The next 4 hours passed in a blur of controlled chaos. Aircraft launched and recovered in continuous cycles, pilots briefing and debriefing between missions while maintenance crews swarmed over their aircraft. Marie found herself at the center of a complex dance, diagnosing problems, prioritizing repairs, and coordinating the efforts of dozens of technicians. The first aircraft to return with significant damage was Raptor 15, piloted by Major Sarah Blackwood. As the F-22 taxied into the maintenance area, Marie could see punctures in the aircraft's skin and what looked like cannon damage to the right engine intake. "What happened up there?" Marie asked as Blackwood climbed down from the cockpit. "Encountered unidentified aircraft with capabilities that shouldn't exist," Blackwood replied, her voice tight with frustration. "Fast, maneuverable, and equipped with weapon systems I've never seen before. They knew exactly how to counter our tactics." Marie began her damage assessment, crawling under the aircraft to examine the extent of the battle damage. The punctures were clean and precise, suggesting weapons with advanced targeting systems. More troubling were the electromagnetic burns on several circuit panels, evidence that the enemy aircraft had employed some form of directed energy weapon. "How many were there?" Marie asked as she documented the damage. 6 in my sector, but the radio chatter suggests similar numbers in the other intercept zones. They appeared on radar for maybe 30 seconds, engaged our fighters with precision we've never seen before, then disappeared again. Half our aircraft took damage before we could even get missile lock." The implications were sobering. Enemy aircraft that could appear and disappear at will, engage F-22s on equal terms, and employ advanced weapons suggested a level of technological sophistication that shouldn't have existed outside American military programs. Not over the next 6 hours, more damaged aircraft returned to Nellis. Each one told a similar story. Brief encounters with highly advanced enemy fighters that seemed to know exactly how F-22s operated and how to exploit their weaknesses. Marie found herself dealing with damage patterns she'd never seen before, trying to repair systems that had been attacked in ways that shouldn't have been possible. The worst case was Raptor 23, piloted by Captain David Chun. The aircraft limped back to base with massive electrical system failures and what appeared to be structural damage to the airframe itself. As Marie examined the fighter, she realized that something had partially melted the aircraft's internal wiring, creating cascading system failures throughout the jet. "Captain, what kind of weapon could do this?" Marie asked as she traced the pattern of electrical damage. Chun shook his head, still processing what he'd experienced. It wasn't a conventional weapon, more like directed electromagnetic pulse, but focused and sustained. The enemy aircraft got within visual range, pointed something at me, and my systems just started failing one by one. Marie felt a chill. That had nothing to do with the Nevada morning air. The damage pattern suggested technology that was years ahead of anything in the American arsenal. Worse, the enemy seemed to understand F-22 vulnerabilities that were closely guarded secrets, known only to a handful of people in the entire Air Force. As she worked to repair the electrical systems, Marie's mind raced through the tactical implications. The enemy wasn't just using advanced technology, they were using it with precision that suggested intimate knowledge of American capabilities and tactics. Someone had provided them with information that should have been impossible to obtain. The situation became critical when Colonel Patricia Martinez, the wing commander, arrived at the maintenance hangar with an expression that made everyone stop what they were doing. Listen up, people. The threat situation has escalated beyond our initial assessments. Intelligence now indicates that the enemy aircraft aren't just attacking our installations. They're specifically targeting our F-22 fleet. Every base with Raptors has been hit, and the enemy seems to know exactly when and where our aircraft will be. Marie exchanged glances with Park and Bradley. The implications were obvious. Either the enemy had developed surveillance capabilities that could track stealth aircraft in real time, or they had access to classified flight schedules and operational plans. What's worse, Colonel Martinez continued, is that our conventional intercept tactics aren't working. These enemy aircraft are faster, more maneuverable, and better armed than anything we've faced before. We've lost 6 F-22s in the last 12 hours, with minimal damage inflicted on enemy forces. The hangar fell silent. Losing 6 F-22s was unprecedented. The aircraft were supposed to be invulnerable to conventional air-to-air threats. For enemy forces to achieve that kind of kill ratio suggested they possessed capabilities that fundamentally changed the balance of air power. "Sir," asked Master Sergeant Bradley, "what's our mission going forward?" "Damage control and rapid response. The enemy seems to be probing our defenses, testing our capabilities. They're not pressing their advantage, which suggests they're gathering intelligence for a larger operation. Our job is to keep as many aircraft mission ready as possible for whatever comes next." As Colonel Martinez departed, Marie found herself thinking about the tactical situation from a pilot's perspective. The enemy's behavior pattern probe, engage briefly, withdraw was consistent with reconnaissance and force operations. They were mapping American response capabilities and identifying weaknesses for exploitation in a future attack. The next aircraft to return drove home just how serious the situation had become. Raptor 08, piloted by Lieutenant Colonel James Wright, one of the most experienced F-22 pilots in the Air Force, had sustained damage that should have been impossible given the aircraft's stealth capabilities. They knew exactly where I was. Wright told Marie as she began her assessment. Came at me from an angle that defeated all my countermeasures. Hit me with weapons that cut through the Raptor's defenses like they weren't there. If I hadn't been flying defensively from the start, I'd be dead right now. The damage to Wright's aircraft was unlike anything Marie had seen. The enemy had targeted specific systems with surgical precision, disabling the F-22's most advanced capabilities while leaving basic flight controls intact. It was the kind of attack that required detailed knowledge of the aircraft's internal architecture. As Marie worked to repair the damage, she found herself drawing on knowledge that went far beyond her supposed training as a maintenance technician. Her understanding of F-22 systems from a pilot's perspective allowed her to see patterns in the enemy attacks that others might miss. "Sergeant Sullivan," called Staff Sergeant Park from across the hangar, "can you take a look at something?" Marie joined Park at a computer terminal, displaying a composite analysis of all the battle damage sustained by returning aircraft. The patterns were subtle, but to someone with Marie's background, They told a disturbing story. The enemy isn't just attacking randomly, Marie observed. They're systematically targeting the systems that give the F-22 its combat advantages. Stealth coatings, advanced radar, electronic warfare capabilities. They know exactly what to hit to reduce our aircraft to the level of conventional fighters. Park studied the display with a growing alarm. How could they know that much about our capabilities? Marie felt a familiar chill as possibilities ran through her mind. The level of detailed knowledge required for such precise attacks suggested either a massive intelligence failure or something even worse, direct access to classified technical data about F-22 systems and tactics. The implications became even more troubling when Captain Hayes arrived at the hangar with news from the pilot briefings. The enemy aircraft aren't just using advanced technology, Hayes reported. They're using tactics that mirror our own classified training scenarios. Maneuvers that are taught only at the highest levels of F-22 training. Engagement patterns from classified wargames that most pilots never see. Marie's blood ran cold. The enemy wasn't just technologically advanced, they were using American tactical doctrine against American pilots. Someone had provided them with access to the most closely guarded secrets of 22 operations. As the day wore on, the situation continued to deteriorate. More aircraft returned with battle damage. Pilot reports painted an increasingly grim picture of enemy capabilities, and intelligence updates suggested that the attacks were expanding in scope and intensity. The breaking point came when Raptor 12, one of the wing's newest aircraft, returned with damage so extensive that it should have been impossible for the pilot to maintain control. Captain Rodriguez, who had questioned Marie about her background just days earlier, climbed down from the cockpit with shaking hands and a 1,000-yard stare of someone who had barely survived an encounter with death. "They're not just better than us," Rodriguez told Marie as she began damage assessment. "They're using our own tactics against us, countering moves before we make them, attacking weaknesses we didn't know we had. It's like fighting ourselves, except they're better at being us than we are." Marie's examination of Rodriguez's aircraft revealed the most sophisticated damage pattern yet. The enemy had disabled specific systems in a sequence that suggested they understood not just how F-22 components worked, but how pilots would respond to cascading failures. They had created a scenario where standard emergency procedures would actually make the situation worse. As Marie worked to understand the full extent of the damage, she realized that the enemy's knowledge went beyond stolen intelligence or advanced surveillance. They understood F-22 operations with the intimacy that came only from direct experience, the kind of detailed, intuitive knowledge that could only be possessed by someone who had actually flown the aircraft in combat. The thought sent ice through her veins. Could the enemy have somehow gained access to former F-22 pilots? Has someone with her level of experience and knowledge been compromised or turned? The possibility was too terrible to contemplate, but the evidence was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. As the sun set over Nellis Air Force Base, Marie found herself facing a situation that her 6 years of careful anonymity had been designed to avoid. The crisis was escalating beyond the capability of conventional response, and the enemy's knowledge of F-22 capabilities suggested that normal tactical approaches would continue to fail. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she could hear the echo of her former squadron commander's words from years ago. "There are times when everything you've learned, everything you've trained for, comes down to one moment when you have to choose between safety and duty." Marie had thought that moment was behind her, buried with Captain Marie Sullivan's official death in Operation Midnight Falcon. But as she looked at the damaged aircraft filling the hangar and listened to the reports of escalating enemy capabilities, she began to realize that her moment of choice was approaching again, and this time, the stakes might be even higher. Emergency briefing at 1800 hours painted the bleakest picture yet. Marie sat in the back of the packed auditorium, officially there as a senior maintenance Technician but absorbing intelligence details with the tactical mind of a combat pilot. Colonel Martinez stood before a room filled with aircrew, intelligence, officers, and support personnel, her expression grave as she outlined the deteriorating situation. In the past 18 hours, we've lost 11 F-22 Raptors across 4 different bases, Martinez announced, her words falling like hammer blows in the silent room. Enemy casualties remain minimal. Our pilots are reporting aircraft performance and tactics that shouldn't exist outside classified American programs. Marie watched the faces around her pilots, who had trained their entire careers to believe in the F-22's technological superiority, now confronting the reality that their most advanced weapons were being systematically neutralized by an unknown enemy. The psychological impact was as devastating as the tactical losses. Intelligence assessment indicates we're facing a coordinated operation by hostile forces, using technology at least 5 years ahead of our current capabilities, Martinez continued. Their knowledge of our tactics, aircraft specifications, and operational procedures suggests either massive intelligence penetration or... She paused, clearly reluctant to voice the alternative, access to information that should be impossible to obtain. Captain Hayes raised his hand from the front row. Ma'am, with respect, what you're describing sounds like they have access to classified technical manuals and tactical doctrine. How is that possible? Martinez exchanged glances with the intelligence officer beside her, Major Rebecca Stone, before responding. That's what we're trying to determine, Captain. What we know for certain is that conventional intercept tactics are proving ineffective. The enemy appears to anticipate our standard responses and counter them before our pilots can adapt. Marie felt her stomach tighten as the implications became clear. The enemy wasn't just technologically advanced, they were using American tactical knowledge against American pilots with devastating effectiveness. Her mind raced through possibilities, each more troubling than the last. What's our response strategy, Colonel? Asked Major Thompson, the squadron operations officer. PACAF headquarters is deploying additional F-22 squadrons from Alaska and Hawaii, but they won't arrive for another 12 hours. In the meantime, we're implementing defensive protocols around critical installations and attempting to develop new tactical approaches that might be more effective against these enemy capabilities. The briefing continued with updates on damaged aircraft status, pilot availability, and logistical challenges. Marie absorbed every detail while maintaining the passive expression expected of support personnel. But internally, she was conducting her own tactical analysis based on combat experience that none of the other people in the room possessed. The enemy's pattern of operations suggested they were testing American responses systematically, probing for weaknesses while avoiding decisive engagement. It was a classic intelligence gathering operation, but conducted with such sophistication that it implied access to the highest levels of classified planning documents. After the briefing, Marie returned to the maintenance hangar where the situation had become even more critical. Raptor 07 had returned with catastrophic engine damage, its pilot barely managing to land before complete power failure. Raptor 19 was grounded with electrical systems so compromised that the aircraft's computers couldn't even run basic diagnostic routines. Master Sergeant Bradley approached her with the harried expression of someone managing an impossible situation. Sullivan, I need your assessment on these birds. How many can we get mission ready by morning? Marie walked through the hangar, evaluating each damaged aircraft with the eye of someone who understood both their mechanical complexity and their tactical importance. The enemy's targeting had been surgical in its precision, disabling specific systems that would ground the aircraft while avoiding damage that might provide intelligence about their weapons technology. Raptor 15 can be back in service in 6 hours if we bypass the damaged avionics bay and reroute through backup systems, she reported. Raptor 23 needs extensive electrical work, but the airframe is sound, 12 hours minimum, Raptor 07. She paused, studying the engine damage. That's going to require component replacement we don't have in stock. Bradley nodded grimly. So we're looking at maybe half our squadron operational by tomorrow morning, assuming no additional losses overnight. The implications were staggering. The 325th Fighter Wing was one of the Air Force's premier F-22 units, and they were being systematically neutralized by an enemy that seemed to understand their capabilities better than they understood themselves. Marie was deep in electrical system repairs on Raptor 23 when Staff Sergeant Park approached with troubled expression. "Marie, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." Marie looked up from the circuit board she was testing, her pulse quickening at Park's serious tone. "What's on your mind, Lisa?" "Your diagnostic work today has been incredible, better than I've seen from technicians with 20 years of experience. You're identifying problems that our computer systems can't detect, understanding system interactions that aren't covered in any technical manual. How is that possible?" Marie felt the walls of her carefully constructed identity beginning to close. In Park's question was the one she'd been dreading for 6 years, the moment when her unconscious displays of expertise became impossible to explain away. "I've been studying these systems for a long time," Marie replied carefully. "Cross-training, personal research, and attention to detail." Park studied her with the penetrating gaze of someone who'd spent 15 years learning to read people, as well as technical specifications. "Marie, I've seen dedicated technicians, and I've seen natural talents. What you're doing goes beyond both. You understand these aircraft like someone who's actually flown them." The observation hit too close to home for Marie to maintain her facade effectively. She could see in Park's eyes the recognition that something didn't add up about Staff Sergeant Marie Sullivan's background and capabilities. Before Marie could formulate a response, the hangar's emergency communication system crackled to life. "All personnel, stand by for priority messages from Wing Command." Colonel Martinez's voice filled the hangar, tight with stress. "We have a developing situation that requires immediate response. Hostile aircraft have been detected approaching Installation 77, approximately 90 minutes out. All available F-22s are being scrambled for intercept, but..." Her voice faltered slightly. "Preliminary analysis suggests the enemy force is larger and more sophisticated than previous encounters." Marie felt her blood run cold. Installation 77 was one of the most classified facilities in the American defense network, housing research programs that were so sensitive their very existence was denied by the government. If the enemy was targeting that facility specifically, it suggested their intelligence penetration was even more extensive than feared. Current pilot availability is limited due to crew rest requirements and combat stress from continuous operations. Martinez continued. "We're launching with partially trained crews and aircraft that haven't completed full maintenance cycles. This is not optimal, but the strategic importance of Installation 77 cannot be overstated." Marie looked around the hangar at the damaged aircraft, the exhausted maintenance crews, and the grim faces of pilots preparing for another mission with equipment they weren't certain they could trust. The Air Force was being pushed beyond its operational limits by an enemy that seemed to anticipate every move. Park grabbed Marie's arm, her grip tight with urgency. "Marie, whatever secrets you're keeping, this isn't the time. If you know something that could help our pilots, you need to speak up. People are going to die out there." The weight of 6 years of careful deception pressed down on Marie like a physical force. She looked at Park's face, saw the desperation there, the recognition that conventional approaches were failing catastrophically. Around them, pilots were strapping into aircraft that might not bring them home, facing an enemy that understood their tactics better than they did. Marie's secure phone had remained silent for 6 years, but she knew the protocols for emergency contact. If the situation at Installation 77 was as critical as it appeared, There were people in the Pentagon who needed to know that Captain Marie Sullivan was alive and available. But making that call would end her anonymity forever and potentially expose the classified operations that had necessitated her death in the first place. The sound of F-22 engines spooling up outside the hangar made the decision urgent. Aircraft were launching for what might be a massacre, piloted by exhausted crews and damaged fighters against an enemy that had proven its superiority in every encounter. "Lisa," Marie said quietly, "if I told you I might know something that could help, but that sharing it would change everything about who you think I am, would you still want to hear it?" Park's eyes widened with understanding that went beyond her specific words. "Marie, if you can save even one pilot's life, I don't care what secrets you've been keeping." Marie looked around the hangar one more time, seeing 6 years of careful anonymity about to crumble under the weight of duty and necessity. Every instinct told her to maintain her cover, to let others handle the crisis while she remained safely hidden behind her maintenance technician facade. But those instincts were overwhelmed by the sound of engines outside, by the knowledge that pilots were launching into a situation they couldn't understand with tactics that wouldn't work. Her oath as an officer had never been revoked, only buried under layers of necessary deception. The duty to protect American lives transcended any personal considerations about maintaining her secret identity. Marie pulled out her cell phone and dialed a number she'd memorized but never used. A direct line to the Pentagon's most classified communication center. As the phone rang, she watched Park's expression shift from curiosity to amazement to something approaching awe. "This is Staff Sergeant Sullivan at Nellis Air Force Base," Marie said when the line connected. "I need to speak with General Morrison immediately. Tell him that Phoenix requests emergency reactivation under Protocol 77 Alpha." Park stared at her as the Pentagon operator processed the unusual request. Marie could see understanding dawning in her colleague's eyes, the recognition that the woman she'd worked beside for months was not who she appeared to be. The phone crackled as the call was transferred through multiple secure switching systems. Marie knew that across the country, classified databases were being accessed, encrypted files were being decrypted, and people who thought Captain Marie Sullivan was dead were learning that reports of her death had been greatly exaggerated. "Phoenix, this is Morrison," came the familiar voice of her former wing commander, now a brigadier general at Air Combat Command. "I thought you were maintaining operational security indefinitely." "Sir, the situation at Nellis has exceeded the parameters of my cover assignment. We're facing an enemy with apparent access to classified F-22 technical specifications and tactical doctrine. Conventional response is proving ineffective, and Installation 77 is under imminent threat." There's a long pause as Morrison processed the implications. Marie could hear other voices in the background, urgent conversations that suggested the Pentagon was dealing with a crisis beyond anything they'd anticipated. "Phoenix, what's your assessment of the tactical situation?" Marie looked around the hangar at the damaged aircraft and exhausted personnel, then toward the runway where more F-22s were launching into what might be their final mission. "Sir, we're losing. The enemy understands our capabilities and limitations better than we do. Our pilots are flying into engagements where they're outmatched tactically and technologically. Without fundamental changes to our approach, Installation 77 will be compromised within the next 2 hours." Another pause, longer this time. Marie could sense the weight of decision-making occurring at the highest levels of the Air Force chain of command. "Phoenix, you're hereby reactivated to your previous rank and status effective immediately. Report to Colonel Martinez and await further orders." "And Marie." Morrison's voice softened slightly. "Welcome back to the world of the living." Marie ended the call and turned to face Park, who was staring at her with an expression that combined shock, admiration, and a dozen unasked questions. "Lisa, I need you to take me to Colonel Martinez immediately. And I need you to understand that everything you thought you knew about me is about to change." As they walked toward the command center, Marie felt the weight of 6 years of careful deception lifting from her shoulders. Captain Marie Sullivan was about to return from the dead, and the enemy that had been systematically destroying American air superiority was about to discover that their intelligence files were incomplete. The moment of choice had arrived, and Marie had chosen duty over safety, truth over deception, and the welfare of her fellow pilots over the preservation of her secret identity. Whatever happened next, Staff Sergeant Marie Sullivan was about to disappear forever, replaced by someone the enemy had never encountered, but should have feared above all others. The walk to Colonel Martinez's command center felt like the longest 100 yards of Marie's life. Staff Sergeant Park matched her stride, glancing sideways with barely contained questions, while the weight of 6 years of maintained deception began shifting into something else entirely, the familiar burden of command responsibility that Marie had thought she'd never carry again. The command center buzzed with controlled chaos. Radio operators coordinated with multiple air bases. Intelligence analysts updated threat assessments in real time, and tactical displays showed the approaching enemy formation as a cluster of red symbols moving inexorably toward installation 77. Colonel Martinez stood at the center of it all, her face etched with the strain of commanding a losing battle. "Colonel Martinez," Marie announced as she approached, her voice carrying an authority that made several nearby officers look up in surprise. "Staff Sergeant Sullivan reporting as ordered, ma'am." Martinez turned, her expression shifting from distraction to confusion as she tried to place why a maintenance technician would be interrupting critical operations. "Sergeant Sullivan, this isn't the time for, ma'am. I've just been reactivated by General Morrison at Air Combat Command. I need to speak with you privately about the tactical situation." The command center fell silent around them. Martinez studied Marie with the penetrating gaze of a commander trying to process information that didn't fit established patterns. "Sergeant, I don't understand what you're talking about. Reactivated to what?" Marie took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would shatter the carefully constructed reality that everyone at Nellis had accepted for the past 6 years. "Ma'am, my name is Captain Marie Elizabeth Sullivan, Calcine Phoenix. I was officially declared killed in action during Operation Midnight Falcon in 2018. I've been operating under deep cover as a maintenance technician for operational security reasons." The silence that followed was so complete that Marie could hear the hum of electronic equipment and the distant sound of aircraft engines. Martinez stared at her as if she'd spoken in a foreign language, while the other personnel in the command center exchanged glances that ranged from confusion to skepticism. "Sergeant Sullivan," Martinez said carefully, "I don't know what kind of stress reaction you're experiencing, but claiming to be a dead pilot is not." Marie's secure phone rang, cutting off Martinez's response. She answered with crisp military bearing that hadn't been heard in her voice for 6 years. "Captain Sullivan, Phoenix, this is General Morrison. I'm patching you through to Colonel Martinez's secure line. Stand by for authentication." Martinez's secure phone buzzed seconds later. She answered with visible reluctance, still staring at Marie with an expression that suggested she was dealing with someone having a psychological breakdown. "Colonel Martinez, this is Brigadier General Morrison at Air Combat Command. The woman standing in front of you is Captain Marie Sullivan, one of our most decorated F-22 pilots. She's been operating under classified cover for the past 6 years. I'm transmitting her personnel file and mission records to your terminal now." Marie watched Martinez's face change as classified data appeared on her screen. Service records, mission histories, and performance evaluations that painted a picture completely different from the maintenance technician everyone thought they knew. The colonel's eyes widened as she scrolled through combat achievements that would have been impressive for a pilot with 20 years of experience, let alone someone who'd supposedly died at age 23. General Morrison, Martinez said. Slowly, according to this file, Captain Sullivan has 7 confirmed air-to-air kills and numerous classified mission completions. But she's been working as a maintenance sergeant at my base for 6 years, I know. The cover assignment was necessary to protect operational security following Operation Midnight Falcon. Colonel, the situation at Installation 77 requires immediate response from someone with Captain Sullivan's unique qualifications. I'm granting her temporary operational command authority for F-22 tactical operations. Martinez set down the phone and looked at Marie with an expression that combined amazement, confusion, and dawning recognition. Around them, the command center. Personnel were beginning to process the impossible revelation that their reliable maintenance technician was actually a combat pilot with a record that exceeded most squadron commanders. Captain Sullivan, Martinez said, testing the title that felt foreign after years of using Marie's enlisted rank. If what General Morrison is saying is true, then you have experience that could be crucial to our current situation. Marie nodded, feeling the familiar weight of command responsibility settling on her shoulders. Ma'am, I've been analyzing the enemy's tactics and capabilities since the attacks began. Based on their performance and apparent knowledge of our systems, I believe we're facing a threat that conventional F-22 operations cannot effectively counter. Major Stone, the intelligence officer, stepped forward with visible skepticism. Captain, if that's really your rank, what makes you think you understand this enemy better than our current pilots and tactical planners? The question carried an edge of professional doubt that Marie recognized from her previous life as an active pilot. Intelligence officers were trained to question anomalous information, and her sudden appearance as a supposedly dead combat ace was certainly anomalous. Major, the enemy's attack patterns and targeting priorities suggest they have access to classified technical specifications and tactical doctrine that should be impossible to obtain. They're not just using advanced technology, they're using our own operational principles against U.S. with precision that indicates direct experience with F-22 systems. Marie moved to the tactical display, her manner shifting from that of a maintenance technician to that of a combat-experienced officer. Look at their approach vectors for the attacks on Creech and Luke. They're using ingress routes that exploit known radar shadows in our detection network. These aren't theoretical weaknesses, they're specific vulnerabilities that are only documented in classified tactical studies. Major Stone studied the display with growing interest. You're suggesting they have access to our tactical planning documents? More than that, I'm suggesting they have access to someone with direct F-22 combat experience. The level of detailed knowledge they're demonstrating can only come from extensive operational experience, not stolen documents or technical intelligence. Captain Hayes, who had been listening from across the command center, approached with an expression that mixed recognition with disbelief. If you're really Captain Sullivan, then you're the pilot who developed the Phoenix maneuver, the defensive tactic that's taught at the highest levels of F-22 training. Marie met his gaze steadily. The Phoenix maneuver was developed during Operation Midnight Falcon when I found myself outnumbered 6-1 by enemy fighters with capabilities that shouldn't have existed. It's designed to exploit the F-22's unique thrust vectoring and stealth characteristics to break multiple missile locks simultaneously. Hayes's skepticism began to waver as Marie described technical details that weren't widely known outside classified training programs. That maneuver saved my life during a training exercise last year. But according to official records, it was developed by a pilot who died in action. I did die officially. The alternative was compromising ongoing intelligence. Operations that were more important than one pilot's career. I've spent 6 years maintaining aircraft that I once flew in combat, watching other pilots use tactics I helped develop, staying silent while people discussed missions I actually flew. The emotional weight of her words resonated through the command center. Staff Sergeant Park, who had remained silent during the revelations, finally spoke up. "Marie, Captain Sullivan, this explains everything about your diagnostic abilities, your understanding of flight systems, the way you think about aircraft problems from a pilot's perspective." Marie nodded, feeling relief at finally being able to acknowledge the truth that had been hidden for so long. "Working as a maintenance technician gave me insights into F-22 systems that most pilots never develop. I understand these aircraft from both perspectives, as a pilot who's pushed them to their limits in combat, and as a technician who knows every component and subsystem." Colonel Martinez studied the tactical display showing the approaching enemy formation. "Captain Sullivan, if your assessment is correct about enemy capabilities, what do you recommend for the defense of Installation 77? Marie analyzed the tactical situation with the rapid, decision-making process that had made her one of the Air Force's most effective combat pilots. "Ma'am, conventional intercept tactics will fail because the enemy anticipates our standard responses. We need to employ unpredictable tactics using aircraft and pilots they haven't had a chance to study." "What do you mean by unpredictable tactics?" "I mean using maneuvers and approaches that aren't in any training manual, developed from actual combat experience rather than theoretical planning. The enemy has studied our documented tactics, but they can't prepare for innovations that don't exist in their intelligence files." Major Thompson, the squadron operations officer, raised an obvious concern. "Captain, with respect, we have pilots launching right now using standard tactics. Are you suggesting we recall them and completely change our approach with less than an hour before enemy contact?" Marie looked at the display showing friendly aircraft positions, then at the enemy formation's projected intercept point. "Major, how many F-22s have we lost using standard tactics against this enemy?" 11 aircraft in 18 hours, Thompson replied grimly. "And how many enemy aircraft have been destroyed using those same tactics?" Thompson's silence provided the answer. Marie turned to address the entire command center, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had faced impossible odds and survived. "The definition of insanity is doing the same thing repeatedly while expecting different results. Our current approach isn't just failing, it's getting our pilots killed while the enemy learns more about our capabilities with each engagement. We need to fundamentally change our tactical approach before Installation 77 is compromised." "Colonel." Martinez weighed the decision with the burden of command that Marie remembered all too well. Changing tactics in the middle of a crisis carried enormous risks, but continuing with approaches that had proven ineffective was equally dangerous. "Captain Sullivan, what specific changes are you proposing?" Marie moved to the communications console, her fingers finding controls with the unconscious familiarity of someone returning to a natural environment. "First, we need to recall our current intercept force and reposition them using approach vectors that exploit the enemy's apparent knowledge of our standard tactics. Second, we need to employ defensive systems integration that goes beyond normal F-22 operational doctrine." Explain defensive systems integration. The enemy has shown they can counter individual F-22s operating independently, but they may not have prepared for coordinated tactics that integrate multiple aircraft in ways that amplify each plane's stealth and offensive capabilities exponentially. Marie began outlining tactical innovations that drew from her combat experience. In Operation Midnight Falcon, modified by 6 years of intimate knowledge of F-22 maintenance and systems capabilities. Her proposals were technically sophisticated and operationally risky, requiring pilot skills and aircraft performance at the absolute limits of possibility. Captain Hayes listened with growing amazement as Marie described maneuvers that pushed beyond anything in current tactical doctrine. "Captain, what you're proposing would require pilot skills that most of our aircrew haven't developed. The coordination requirements alone are beyond standard training." Marie turned to face him directly, her eyes holding the hard certainty of someone who had survived combat against impossible odds. "Captain, I'll be leading the intercept mission personally. The tactics I'm proposing are based on experience that no other pilot currently possesses. If they're going to work, I need to be in the cockpit to execute them." The command center fell silent as the implications became clear. Marie wasn't just proposing new tactics. She was volunteering to return to combat operations after 6 years of enforced absence, betting her life and the lives of other pilots on approaches that existed nowhere except in her memory of a classified mission that officially never happened. Colonel Martinez looked at the tactical display, then at Marie, weighing the desperate circumstances against the unprecedented nature of the proposed solution. "Captain Sullivan, you haven't flown combat operations in 6 years. Are you certain you can execute the tactics you're proposing?" Marie felt the familiar pre-combat clarity settling over her mind, the sharpened focus that had carried her through the most dangerous missions of her career. "Ma'am, I've spent 6 years maintaining these aircraft, learning their capabilities from perspectives that most pilots never develop. I understand the F-22 better now than I did during my original combat tour, and the enemy has never faced a pilot with my specific combination of experience and knowledge." The weight of decision pressed down on everyone in the command center. Installation 77 remained under threat. Conventional tactics had proven ineffective, and the only alternative was trusting a pilot who had been officially dead for 6 years to lead a mission using tactics that existed nowhere in official doctrine. Marie stood at the center of it all, no longer the anonymous maintenance technician who had hidden in plain sight for years, but Captain Marie Sullivan returning to the role she had never truly abandoned. The moment of revelation was complete, and now came the ultimate test of whether her unique qualifications could save lives and protect national security. When everything else had failed, Marie strode across the tarmac toward Raptor 05 with the purposeful gait of someone returning to their natural element. The aircraft had been her personal project for the past 2 weeks, a complete systems overhaul that had required replacing damaged components from the previous day's engagement. Now, as she approached the fighter that would carry her back into combat, she felt the familiar pre-mission clarity settling over her mind like a comfortable shroud. The maintenance crew that had prepared the aircraft watched with expressions ranging from amazement to confusion. Airman Morrison, the young technician she had mentored just days before, approached with wide eyes and a maintenance tablet clutched in trembling hands. Captain Sullivan," he stammered, still processing the revelation that his patient instructor was actually a decorated combat pilot. "All systems are green, ma'am. I've triple-checked everything according to your specifications." Marie accepted the tablet and reviewed the pre-flight inspection data with the meticulous attention that had kept her alive through dozens of combat missions. But now she was reading the information with both her pilot's understanding of performance requirements and her technician's knowledge of every component's individual characteristics. "Outstanding work, Morrison. The hydraulic pressure readings are exactly where they need to be for high-G maneuvering. The electrical systems integration you completed will give us response times that could make the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure." She handed back the tablet and began her external inspection of the aircraft, her movements now displaying the unconscious confidence of someone who belonged in this environment. The other maintenance personnel gathered at a respectful distance, watching as their former colleague transformed before their eyes from mechanic to warrior. Staff Sergeant Park approached carrying Marie's flight gear equipment that had been hastily retrieved from classified storage and updated with current communication protocols. "Marie, I still can't believe this is really happening. 6 years I've worked alongside you, and I never suspected." Marie accepted the helmet and survival vest, checking each component with practiced efficiency. "Lisa, the best cover identities are built on truth. I really am an expert aircraft mechanic. I just learned those skills from a different perspective than my personnel file indicated." As Marie suited up in her flight gear, the transformation became complete. The careful posture and measured movements of Staff Sergeant Sullivan disappeared, replaced by the fluid efficiency of Captain Sullivan preparing for combat. Her body remembered the rhythm of pre-flight preparation, hands finding equipment locations, automatically, while her mind shifted into the focused state that separated combat pilots from ordinary mortals. Colonel Martinez arrived as Marie completed her gear check, accompanied by the 3 other pilots who would fly the mission. Captain Hayes, Major Blackwood, and Lieutenant Colonel Wright, all experienced F-22 pilots, but none with the specific qualifications that had made Marie's resurrection necessary. "Captain Sullivan," Martinez said, "I want to be absolutely clear about the mission parameters. Installation 77 must be protected at all costs. If your unconventional tactics fail, you have authorization to engage enemy forces using any means necessary to prevent them from reaching their target." Marie nodded, understanding the implicit message. This wasn't just another intercept mission, it was a potential last stand against an enemy that had systematically defeated every conventional approach the Air Force had attempted. "Understood, ma'am. One question, what's the current status of the enemy formation?" Major Stone consulted her intelligence tablet. 12 aircraft and 3 4-ship formations, approaching from different vectors to overwhelm defensive responses. They're maintaining electronic silence, but satellite tracking shows them approximately 40 minutes from Installation 77 at current speed. Marie studied the tactical display, her mind automatically calculating intercept geometries and engagement possibilities. The enemy's approach pattern was sophisticated, designed to force defending aircraft into disadvantageous positions while maximizing their own tactical flexibility. "They're expecting us to respond with standard defensive tactics," Marie observed. 4-ship formations suggest they're prepared for conventional F-22 engagement patterns, but they may not have planned for the tactics we're going to employ. Captain Hayes, who would serve as Marie's wingman despite his senior rank, looked skeptical. "Captain, I have to ask, the maneuvers you described in the briefing are beyond anything in current training. Are you certain we can execute them safely?" Marie turned to face him directly, her eyes holding the hard certainty of someone who had survived situations where failure meant death. "Captain, the enemy has studied our training manuals and prepared countermeasures for every tactic we normally employ. Our only advantage is doing things they haven't prepared for, using capabilities they don't know we possess." She gestured toward the 4 F-22s lined up on the taxiway. Each of these aircraft has been modified with systems integration that goes beyond standard configuration. The maintenance work completed over the past 6 years has created capabilities that exist nowhere in official technical documentation. Major Blackwood raised an eyebrow. "What kind of modifications?" "Enhanced electronic warfare integration, improved sensor fusion, and flight control responses optimized for maneuvers that push beyond normal operational limits. I've spent 6 years learning these aircraft from the inside out, understanding not just what they're designed to do, but what they're actually capable of doing." Marie climbed the crew ladder to her aircraft's cockpit, settling into the ejection seat with the unconscious familiarity of someone coming home after a long absence. Her hands found the controls automatically, muscle memory overriding 6 years of suppressed instincts. As she began the startup sequence, the F-22 systems came online with the smooth precision that had made it the world's most advanced fighter aircraft. But Marie's understanding of those systems went far deeper than any other pilot's. She knew the individual characteristics of every component, the performance margins of every subsystem, and the integration possibilities that existed beyond normal operational parameters. "Phoenix lead, this is Tower. You're cleared for immediate takeoff. Good hunting, Captain." Marie advanced the throttles, feeling the familiar surge of power as 44,000 pounds of thrust pushed her aircraft forward. The F-22 accelerated down the runway with the effortless grace that had made it legendary, and Marie felt 6 years of suppressed longing evaporate as the aircraft rotated and climbed into the Nevada sky. Phoenix Flight, this is lead. Form up. For tactical approach, we're going to employ non-standard tactics that will require absolute precision and complete trust in your aircraft's capabilities. The other 3 F-22s joined her in a formation that appeared conventional but incorporated. Subtle positioning that maximized their combined stealth and sensor capabilities. Marie had spent hours during the planning session, explaining how minor adjustments to formation geometry could create exponential improvements in tactical effectiveness. As they climbed toward their intercept altitude, Marie felt the familiar clarity of combat operations settling over her mind. The world beyond her cockpit faded to background information, while her consciousness focused entirely on the tactical situation developing ahead. This was the state of mind that had carried her through Operation Midnight Falcon, a level of concentration and awareness that transformed the aircraft from machine to extension of her own body. Phoenix Flight, contact on bearing 270, range 60 miles. Multiple aircraft in tactical formation, electronic signatures consistent with previous encounters. Marie studied the threat display, analyzing the enemy formation's approach pattern with the tactical intuition that had made her legendary. Their positioning was textbook perfect for conventional engagement scenarios, but it also created vulnerabilities that could be exploited by someone willing to operate outside established doctrine. Phoenix 2, 3, and 4, execute pattern Delta on my mark. We're going to approach from vectors they won't expect, using the terrain masking we discussed during the briefing. The 4 F-22s separated into what appeared to be random flight paths, but Marie's tactical planning had created a complex approach pattern that would bring them into engagement, range from directions the enemy couldn't simultaneously monitor. It was a maneuver that required split-second timing and absolute faith in each pilot's ability to execute precise navigation under combat conditions. Phoenix Lead, this is 4. I'm showing multiple threat radars becoming active. They're beginning. Active search patterns. Marie smiled grimly as her threat warning systems lit up with indications of enemy search radars. The enemy was reacting exactly as she had predicted, employing electronic systems that would reveal their positions while searching for F-22s approaching conventional vectors. All Phoenix aircraft maintain electronic silence. Their search patterns are based on standard F-22 tactics. As long as we approach along the vectors we discussed, their radars won't detect us until we're inside their engagement envelope. Marie's aircraft skinned through a canyon that provided natural radar masking, her flight path calculated to exploit terrain features that would hide her approach until the last possible moment. The other F-22s were following parallel routes, each pilot navigating with the precision required to arrive at the target area simultaneously. Phoenix Lead, range 20 miles. Enemy formation is beginning to separate into attack elements. Marie checked her weapon systems, confirming that her aircraft's missiles were armed and ready. But the tactics she planned to employ would require close-range maneuvering that pushed beyond the F-22's normal operational envelope, the kind of flying that separated exceptional pilots from merely competent ones. All Phoenix aircraft, prepare for engagement. Execute Alpha pattern in 3.2.1. Mark. The 4 F-22s emerged from their concealed approach routes simultaneously, appearing on enemy radar screens from directions that conventional tactics suggested were impossible. Marie's formation had achieved tactical surprise through precise navigation and timing that required skills beyond standard pilot training. The enemy's response was immediate but confused. Their defensive systems had been configured to counter attacks from predictable vectors, and they needed precious seconds to reorient their sensors and weapons to address threats appearing from unexpected directions. Marie didn't give them those seconds. Phoenix lead engaged. She fired her first missile at maximum range, targeting the enemy formation leader, with a shot that exploited his aircraft's radar signature while it was reconfiguring defensive systems. The AIM-120 tracked perfectly, detonating against an enemy fighter that never saw the attack coming. The remaining enemy aircraft scattered, their formation discipline breaking down as they attempted to address multiple threats appearing from impossible directions. But their reaction played directly into Marie's tactical plan. She had anticipated their response and positioned her aircraft to exploit the confusion. Phoenix 2, engaging from the east. Splash 1. Captain Hayes announced his first kill. Using the approach angle Marie had assigned to catch an enemy fighter, while it was focused on threats from other directions, the enemy pilots were skilled, but they were operating according to tactical doctrine that assumed conventional F-22 engagement patterns. Marie's formation was employing maneuvers that didn't exist in any training manual, developed from combat experience that most pilots never survived to acquire. Phoenix 3 and 4. Execute hammer pattern. Drive them toward the valley entrance where I can engage with thermal advantage. Major Blackwood and Lieutenant Colonel Wright maneuvered their aircraft with precision that forced the remaining enemy fighters into a tactical box, limited in their escape routes and exposed to follow-up attacks from angles they couldn't effectively defend. Marie's own engagement required flying at the absolute limits of her aircraft's capabilities. She pulled the F-22 through maneuvers that generated G-forces beyond normal human tolerance, using the fighter's thrust vectoring and advanced flight controls to achieve impossible angles of attack while maintaining weapons tracking. Phoenix lead engaged multiple targets. Splash 2. Her second and third kills came within seconds of each other, achieved through maneuvering that exploited her intimate knowledge of F-22 performance characteristics combined with tactical innovations developed during Operation Midnight Falcon. The enemy formation survivors attempted to disengage, but Marie's tactical planning had anticipated their escape routes. The canyon terrain that had concealed her approach now trapped the enemy aircraft in an environment where their advanced technology couldn't overcome superior tactics and pilot skill. All Phoenix aircraft maintain pursuit. These aircraft cannot be allowed to reach Installation 77 under any circumstances. The running battle that followed showcased the absolute pinnacle of fighter aircraft performance and pilot capability. Marie's formation employed tactics that pushed their F-22s beyond design specifications, while maintaining coordination that would have been impossible without the specialized training and experience that only one pilot possessed. When the engagement ended 12 minutes later, all enemy aircraft had been destroyed without a single American loss. Marie's tactical innovations had proven that superior pilot skill and unconventional thinking could overcome technological advantages when applied with precision and creativity. Phoenix lead, this is control. Outstanding work. Installation 77. Reports all clear. Enemy formation has been completely neutralized. As Marie led her formation back toward Nellis, she felt the satisfaction of mission completion combined with the deeper fulfillment of proving that her unique qualifications had been worth preserving. The 6 years of anonymity and suppressed identity had been vindicated by 12 minutes of combat that saved lives and protected national security. But she also knew that this engagement marked the end of her hidden existence forever. Captain Marie Sullivan had returned from the dead in the most public way possible, and there would be no going back to the quiet anonymity of a maintenance technician. All Phoenix aircraft, this is lead. Mission accomplished. Time to go home. 3 months after the successful defense of Installation 77, Colonel Marie Elizabeth Sullivan stood before a packed auditorium at the United States Air Force Academy, wearing the silver eagles of her newly restored rank and the ribbon of the Distinguished Flying Cross that had been classified for 6 years. The young cadets in the audience represented the next generation of Air Force pilots, and Marie's story had become required study for understanding the evolution of modern air combat. The most important lesson I can share with you today, Marie addressed the attentive crowd, is that excellence in military aviation requires more than just exceptional flying skills. It demands a comprehensive understanding of the entire weapons system, from the smallest maintenance component to the most complex tactical scenario. She gestured toward the large display screen, showing technical cutaways of F-22 systems. During my 6 years as a maintenance technician, I learned that the boundary between pilot and mechanic is artificial. Every component in these aircraft affects performance in ways that traditional training doesn't fully explore. The pilot who understands their machine at the molecular level will always have advantages over those who see it as just another tool. Cadet First Class Amanda Torres raised her hand from the front row. Colonel Sullivan, how did your maintenance experience change your approach to flying? Marie smiled, remembering her own days as an eager cadet asking similar questions. It taught me to think in terms of system limitations and possibilities rather than just operational procedures. When you understand why a component behaves a certain way under stress, you can push performance boundaries that textbook-trained pilots never discover. She walked to the podium's edge, her manner becoming more conversational. For example, during the engagement that saved Installation 77, I used thrust vectoring techniques that aren't in any manual because I understood the engines, mechanical tolerances from rebuilding them. That knowledge allowed maneuvers that surprised our enemies and probably saved my life. The questions continued for another hour, covering everything from tactical innovation to career resilience. Marie found herself enjoying the teaching role more than she had expected. After years of suppressing her knowledge and experience, being able to share insights openly felt like emerging from a long dark tunnel into sunlight. Following the presentation, Marie walked across the academy grounds with Brigadier General Morrison, her former wing commander who had orchestrated her return to active duty. The Colorado mountains provided a spectacular backdrop for their conversation about the future of air combat training. Marie, the Pentagon is very interested in formalizing the lessons learned from your unique career path, Morrison explained. There's discussion about creating a new training program that combines traditional pilot development with comprehensive technical education. Marie nodded thoughtfully. The old model of separating pilots from maintainers made sense when aircraft were simpler. But modern fighters are so complex that operational effectiveness requires understanding the technology at levels that traditional training doesn't provide. Exactly. Your success wasn't just about exceptional flying skills. It was about applying knowledge that most pilots never acquire. The question is how to systematically develop that knowledge in future aircrew. They paused at an overlook providing panoramic views of the Academy's campus. Marie thought about the path that had brought her here, from promising young pilot to officially dead operative, to anonymous mechanic to decorated colonel. Each phase had contributed essential elements to her current capabilities. Generally, I think the key is breaking down the artificial barriers between different specialties. Pilots should spend significant time in maintenance roles, understanding their aircraft from the ground up. Maintainers should have flight training to understand operational requirements. The integration needs to be fundamental, not just superficial cross-training. Morrison studied her with the expression of someone recognizing wisdom earned through extraordinary circumstances. Would you be interested in heading such a program? The Air Force needs someone with your unique perspective to develop training that prepares pilots for the realities of future combat. The offer represented everything Marie had thought she'd lost forever: the opportunity to shape the future of military aviation while applying knowledge gained through sacrifice and perseverance. But it also meant accepting that her days of anonymity were permanently over, replaced by the visibility and responsibility that came with senior leadership. "I'd be honored, sir. But I have one condition. The program needs to include psychological preparation for adapting to unexpected circumstances. The ability to reinvent yourself when conditions change is as important as technical knowledge." "Meaning?" Marie gazed across the mountains, thinking about the cadets she'd just addressed and the challenges they would face in their careers. "Meaning that the pilots of the future need to be prepared for missions and circumstances that don't exist in current planning documents. Flexibility and innovation will be more valuable than rigid adherence to established doctrine." 6 weeks later, Marie found herself back at Nellis Air Force Base, but now as the commanding officer of the newly established Advanced Integration Training Center. The facility occupied buildings that had been hastily converted from storage to cutting-edge educational facilities, reflecting the Pentagon's urgency in implementing her proposed training innovations. Staff Sergeant Lisa Park, now promoted to Technical Sergeant, served as Marie's senior enlisted advisor, a role that leveraged her experience working with Marie during both her hidden and revealed periods. Their first meeting in Marie's new office carried undertones of surreal humor about their transformed relationship. "Colonel, it's still weird calling you that," Park admitted as she briefed Marie on the training center's startup challenges. 6 years of thinking you were just an exceptionally skilled mechanic, and now you're my commanding officer with a combat record that makes most squadron commanders look like beginners." Marie laughed, enjoying the candid conversation that their history made possible. "Lisa, your perspective during those 6 years was invaluable for maintaining my cover identity. The fact that you accepted my expertise without questioning its source too deeply helped me stay hidden when I needed to be. Looking back, there were so many signs that didn't add up. Your diagnostic abilities, the way you understood flight systems, your intuitive knowledge of pilot behavior. I should have figured it out. Actually, the fact that you didn't figure it out proves how well the cover identity worked. You saw what I needed you to see, a dedicated technician with unusual skills, but a believable background. That perception helped keep me safe for 6 years." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the first class of students for the Advanced Integration Training Program. 12 experienced F-22 pilots and 12 senior maintenance specialists would spend the next 6 months learning each other's specialties while developing the kind of comprehensive understanding that had made Marie's tactical innovations possible. Major Sarah Blackwood, one of the pilots from the Installation 77 mission, led the pilot group. Master Sergeant Tom Bradley represented the maintenance specialists. Seeing them together in a classroom setting, preparing to break down traditional barriers between their professions, gave Marie satisfaction that transcended personal achievement. "Welcome to a training program that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world," Marie addressed the combined group. "For the next 6 months, pilots will learn to think like maintainers, and maintainers will learn to think like pilots. More importantly, you'll all learn to think like warriors who understand every aspect of the weapon systems you employ." She gestured toward the F-22 visible through the classroom windows. "That aircraft represents the pinnacle of current technology, but technology alone doesn't win battles. Victory comes from understanding your tools so completely that you can employ them in ways that surprise your enemies and exceed your own expectations." The training program that followed was unlike anything in Air Force history. Pilots spent weeks in maintenance hangars learning to diagnose and repair the aircraft they flew. Maintainers received flight training that helped them understand the operational stresses their work needed to accommodate. Both groups studied tactical scenarios that required creative problem solving rather than adherence to established procedures. Marie found herself energized by the teaching role in ways she hadn't anticipated. After years of suppressing her knowledge and experience, being able to share insights openly while watching students develop new capabilities felt like the culmination of her entire career journey. 3 months into the program, The first graduation exercise demonstrated the potential of Marie's integrated training approach. Students were presented with a scenario involving damaged aircraft, unconventional threats, and tactical situations that required both technical innovation and operational creativity. The solutions they developed exceeded anything Marie had expected. Pilots applied maintenance knowledge to modify aircraft systems for enhanced performance. Maintainers contributed tactical insights that improved mission planning. Most importantly, both groups worked together with mutual respect and understanding that traditional training rarely achieved. Colonel Sullivan, Major Blackwood, reported after the exercise, "What we've learned here changes everything about how I approach flying. Understanding the aircraft at the component level gives me confidence to push performance boundaries I never knew existed." Master Sergeant Bradley echoed similar sentiments from the maintenance perspective. "Working with pilots who understand our challenges and capabilities has already improved our efficiency and job satisfaction. We're not just fixing planes, we're optimizing weapon systems for specific mission requirements." The success of the initial program led to expansion orders from the Pentagon. Similar training centers were planned for other fighter aircraft and military specialties. Marie's career resurrection had evolved into something larger than personal vindication. It had become a catalyst for fundamental improvements in military training effectiveness. 1 year after her dramatic return to active duty, Marie stood in her office reviewing reports from students who had completed the KICO Advanced Integration Training Program and returned to operational squadrons. Their performance improvements were measurable and significant, validating the principles she had advocated. A knock on her door interrupted her review. Airman First Class Danny Morrison entered with the respectful bearing of someone who still remembered learning from her when she was disguised as a maintenance sergeant. "Colonel Sullivan, I wanted to thank you for everything you taught me during your previous assignment," Morrison said carefully. "The diagnostic techniques and system understanding you shared made me one of the best technicians in my squadron. But more than that, you showed me that excellence comes from curiosity and continuous learning, not just following procedures." Marie smiled, remembering the eager young man who had approached her with radar calibration problems that seemed impossibly complex. "Danny, you had the talent and dedication from the beginning. I just helped you develop confidence to trust your own abilities." "Ma'am, there's something I've always wondered about. Even when I thought you were just a sergeant, you approached problems differently than anyone else. You seemed to understand not just how things worked, but why they were designed that way. How did you develop that perspective?" The question touched on the heart of what Marie had learned through her extraordinary journey. "Danny, comprehensive understanding comes from experiencing systems from multiple perspectives. The more viewpoints you can develop about any complex system, the better you'll understand its possibilities and limitations." As Morrison departed, Marie reflected on the path that had brought her to this moment. The frightened young pilot who had volunteered for Operation Midnight Falcon could never have imagined the journey that followed official death, secret resurrection, years of hidden identity, dramatic revelation, and ultimate transformation into a leader who was changing how the Air Force approached training and development. Her secure phone rang, displaying the Pentagon number that had remained silent for 6 years before changing her life forever. But now, instead of representing crisis and emergency, the call brought news of expansion and opportunity. "Colonel Sullivan, this is General Morrison. I'm calling to inform you that the Advanced Integration Training Center concept is being adopted Air Force-wide. You're being promoted to Brigadier General and assigned to head the new Integrated Warfare Training Command. Congratulations, Marie. You've changed how we think about developing warriors for the 21st century." As Marie accepted the promotion and new responsibilities, she looked out her window at the flight line where F-22s were preparing for evening training missions. Young pilots and maintainers worked together with the kind of mutual understanding and shared expertise that her program had fostered. She thought about the anonymous maintenance sergeant who had watched those same aircraft with longing and suppressed knowledge, never imagining that her hidden expertise would eventually transform military training. The journey from Staff Sergeant Sullivan to Brigadier General Sullivan had required sacrifices and challenges that would have broken most people. But it had also created opportunities to influence the future in ways that conventional career paths never could have achieved. Marie Elizabeth Sullivan had returned from the dead to discover that her greatest contributions lay not in her past achievements, but in her ability to share knowledge that could multiply effectiveness across entire generations of military personnel. The mechanic who had saved the base with damaged F-22 had become the leader, who was transforming how the Air Force prepared for future conflicts. Outside her window, the sun set over Nevada as another day of training concluded, and another group of students prepared to carry integrated expertise to operational squadrons around the world. The legend of Phoenix had evolved from personal resurrection to institutional transformation, ensuring that the lessons learned through extraordinary circumstances would benefit warriors who would never know the story of the woman who had made their excellence possible. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.